My name is Cameron Ellis. I wasn't born important, or brilliant, or even all that likable, if I'm being honest. I was just there. The kind of kid who sat in the second row, never the first. The kind of man who held the elevator door and smiled when no one said thank you. I've always been hard to remember and harder to forget once you realized your mistake. The day I started at Varelix Technologies, I wore a suit that didn't fit with sleeves that swallowed my wrists and shoulders too wide for my frame. I showed up 15 minutes early, stood in the lobby for 10. No one came to greet me. Eventually, someone buzzed me in. She didn't look up from her phone. I still remember the way she sighed. That was my first clue. The second came when they handed me my name badge. It said Connor Ellis. I said nothing. Most people think revenge starts with rage. But that's not true. Mine started with quiet. And coffee? Lots and lots of coffee. Because for the first 6 months, that's what I did. I fetched it. Tall for Greg, iced for Mia. No whip for Devin, but extra hot. I learned the orders before I learned the people. Because the people didn't really want to be learned. They wanted someone to do the things they didn't want to do. Someone invisible. And I was perfect for that. "You're good at this," Greg said once, tossing a sugar packet across the table like I was a dog who just caught a stick. "Thanks," I replied. "It's the highlight of my engineering degree." He laughed. They didn't fire me. But they never promoted me either. They used words like culture fit and collaborative alignment. What they meant was, stay in your lane. So I stayed. I kept my head down. And after work, when they were off at rooftop bars and industry mixers, I stayed behind. Not out of duty, out of spite. There's something dangerous about a quiet man with a bruised ego and access to the company servers. Don't get me wrong, I never stole anything. Not technically. But I remembered everything I saw, and I read code the way some people read confessions. One night, while scrubbing through discarded project folders, I found a framework, half-finished, badly commented, and thrown out by some exec's nephew. It was meant to be an internal tool to optimize machine learning layers. But it was lazy, unscaled, untapped. It whispered possibility to me. So I listened. At home in my small studio apartment with a cracked window and a desk made of cinder blocks, I started rebuilding it from scratch. Not for them. For me. Still during the day, I smiled. I nodded. I said things like, great insight, and happy to circle back. They thought I was harmless. That's the mistake people make with men like me. We don't shout. We don't make scenes. We simmer. We store. And when the moment comes, we don't explode. We walk in with a flash drive and a calm face and make everyone else feel like they missed the meeting where the rules changed. It wasn't fast. It took me years. 5 to be exact. 5 years of overlooked effort. Of Cameron, could you grab lunch? Of meetings I wasn't invited to, even when I built the dashboard they were presenting from. I remember once Devin was on stage at a conference talking about his new predictive learning model. He misspelled hierarchical on the first slide. It was my slide. And I just stood there in the shadows behind the curtain clipboard in hand. That was the day I realized something important. They didn't want me to succeed. They wanted me to serve their success. I went home that night and deleted every trace of myself from their servers. Not out of panic, out of principle. And then I disappeared, at least to them. In truth, I was just getting started. I applied to one of those obscure research fellowships. Got in. No interviews, just code samples and potential. Turns out, when you're not weighed down by office politics and ego-driven bosses, you can move fast. By the second year, I had 2 research papers, 1 patent pending. By the third, I'd licensed my open-source architecture to 7 startups. They used it because it worked, because it scaled, because it didn't care who Cameron Ellis used to be. I remember the email from the conference committee. Subject line, nomination confirmed. I didn't even remember applying. That year, the North American AI Futures Summit was held at the very same venue where Devin had once stood, mispronouncing my code. This time I wasn't backstage. I was the final keynote speaker, award recipient, and media guest. I wore a better suit, no sleeves swallowing my hands. In the green room, I caught my own reflection. Older, sharper, steadier. The man I had grown into while no one was watching. And when I stepped onto the stage, the lights hot and the air quiet, I scanned the audience. 3rd row, Greg, Mia, Devin, Not invited, but very much present. Their faces, tight smiles, crossed arms, confused applause, like watching a ghost walk out of their rearview mirror. I didn't wave. I didn't smirk. I just stood there, alive, seen, and finally unignored. P1, they were all there. Devin sat with one ankle crossed over his knee, trying to look like this wasn't strange to him. That the man he used to send for dry cleaning hadn't just taken the stage he used to own. Greg blinked more than normal. His hand never left his chin. And Mia, Mia kept her face frozen in what she probably practiced in the mirror. Supportive neutrality. But I noticed the twitch in her left brow. She was calculating, always had been. I let the silence hang for a few seconds longer than necessary. Not out of cruelty, out of respect. The moment deserved breath. The lights were warm, not blinding, just soft enough to make everything feel a little unreal. Like a dream I'd walked into backwards. One I'd already lived, just never believed could be real. Then I spoke. Thank you. I said into the mic, my voice softer than expected. No booming tone, no performance. Just me. No one interrupted. No coughs, no rustling. Just silence. The good kind. I wasn't supposed to be here, I began. A few polite chuckles rippled across the room, people assuming modesty. It wasn't that. That literally. I wasn't invited to most of the meetings where the product this award honors was actually discussed. I was just around. A pause. I made coffee. I built dashboards. I waited in the hallway while they closed the doors behind me. But I watched, and I listened, and when they said I'd never be more than support, well, I gave the faintest smile. I supported myself. A few more laughs, nervous ones. From people trying to figure out if this was part of the bit or a confession. Devin shifted in his seat. I saw it even from the stage. That slight motion of discomfort when your name isn't mentioned, but your guilt is. The moderator was seated off to the left behind the teleprompter. I saw her glance at her notes, then at me. I'd gone off script. I didn't care. I folded the printed speech, placed it beside the mic stand, and continued without it. This industry is built on the backs of people you forget. People like me. People who leave fingerprints on patents they'll never sign. People who solve bugs in the dark, then get thanked by being left off the release memo. It wasn't angry. It wasn't even sad. It was just true. The kind of truth that lands slow like fog. You don't feel it until your skin's already damp. I saw it settling in the faces before me, especially in the third row. Mia looked away first. She always hated when I got philosophical. Greg sat frozen the same way he did at the time his code crashed a live demo in front of our investors. Same jawline tension, same tiny vein in the forehead. Devin was smiling now, but it was the wrong kind of smile. The kind people wear when they want to be in on the joke, but realize the joke's already over. I didn't name them. I never had to. The best revenge doesn't call you out. It lets you hear your own name echo in someone else's silence. I closed the speech with something gentle. No gloat, no burn. Just, I built this because I needed something of my own. I never expected anyone to notice. But now that you have thank you, it means more than you think. Applause came before I stepped away from the mic. Not thunderous, but real. It wasn't for theatrics. It was for recognition. The quiet kind, the kind I always wanted, not the kind they flaunted. As I walked backstage, I passed a young man holding a camera rig. Maybe 22, maybe 25. His face lit up. Hey, wow. That was amazing, he said. I'm an intern at Theta Core and, just thanks. I nodded. I'd been him once. Then I slipped through a service hallway and out onto the back balcony. It overlooked the city skyline, lights blinking like soft beacons in the dusk. The air tasted clean. Maybe that was just the moment. I pulled my phone from my jacket, opened it, and tapped a message I had saved in drafts for 2 years. To Devon Mia Greg. Subject. No hard feelings. Text. Thanks for everything. Especially the meetings I wasn't invited to. They gave me time to build something better. Hope you enjoyed the show. I hovered over send. Then I deleted it. I didn't need to say it. They were already thinking it. A vibration buzzed in my pocket, an alert from the live stream. The video of my speech was already climbing. Over 30,000 views in the first hour. The comments were coming in fast. This guy's a legend. Is this the quietest roast in tech history? Put him on the board of everything. I smiled. Not a big one. Just enough. Because here's the thing. When they said I'd never be anything, they meant I'd never be them. They were right. I became better. When I was still just a whisper in their inbox, I used to imagine what it would feel like to finally get my moment. Would it be loud? Triumphant? Would I cry? No. Turns out it feels like walking into a room you used to clean and being handed the keys. After the ceremony, I didn't linger. I didn't pose with the award. Didn't do interviews. Didn't clink glasses of dry champagne with people who only remembered me now because someone else clapped first. I walked out through the front lobby holding the award like it weighed less than it should have. It was beautiful, sure. A minimalist steel arc with my name etched near the base. But honestly, I'd already won long before they engraved it. I stepped out into the night, the buzz of the city brushing my skin like a cold rinse after a long nap. My ride was waiting. An electric sedan I didn't own but had on standby. The driver opened the door with a nod. Not recognition, just routine. Good. I liked being anonymous again. Once inside, I loosened my collar and finally exhaled. And that's when I saw the notification. New message from Mia Whittaker. Subject line, "Congratulations, can we talk?" Of course. I stared at the screen for a long second, maybe two, then opened it. "Hey, Cam, saw your speech tonight. You were incredible. Look, I know things weren't perfect back then. I know we didn't always see you, but I want you to know I always respected you. If you're open to it, I'd love to grab a coffee sometime and catch up. Maybe talk about how our firms could collaborate. We've been exploring AI partnerships lately and, well, it would be great to reconnect." I read it once. Then again, it was well written, polished, carefully composed to sound casual, and it would have worked 5 years ago. I didn't reply. Instead, I opened a voice note app because I wanted to remember how I felt in that exact moment. And what I felt was peace, not triumph, not even satisfaction. Just that rare kind of peace that comes when you realize you no longer need the thing you once begged for. Their attention, their validation, their seats at their shiny round table. I had my own table now, and it wasn't round. It was long, sturdy, built from scratch. And the only people sitting there were the ones who didn't need reminding who I was in the first place. The next morning, I woke up to 37 new emails. Some from people I'd never heard of, some from old professors, some from Varelix employees, junior devs, admins, one, even from the woman who used to call me Connor for a year, all congratulating me. One message stood out. It was from Isaac, the intern I mentioned backstage. He wrote, "Cameron, I watched your talk 3 times already. It made me feel like maybe I don't have to fake confidence anymore. They've got me writing dev notes no one reads and scrubbing lines of broken legacy code, and sometimes I wonder if it matters. But you made it matter. Just wanted to say thanks." Isaac. I stared at it longer than I meant to, because once upon a time I was him, sitting in the corner, making copies, writing code that no one signed their name to but used anyway. So I wrote him back, "Isaac, keep every receipt. Save your work, your emails, your notes. But more importantly, keep your head. You're not invisible. You're just not loud yet. But the right ones see you, and that's enough. For now." 3 days later, I got a call, not a text, not an email, a full-blown call. I didn't recognize the number, but I answered anyway. Cameron Ellis. The voice on the other end was deeper than I remembered, but unmistakable. "Greg," I said. Flat. No emotion. He chuckled like this was casual. "Didn't think you'd pick up." I almost didn't. Fair. "Hey, listen, I know things were messy before, and I know we didn't always treat you." "Don't," I said, cutting him off gently. Pause. "Right," he murmured. "Okay, then let me be straight." That was new. "I'm heading a new division. We're looking for someone with your vision. Would love to bring you on. Leadership level. Your own team. Competitive package." I waited. "No need to answer now," he continued. "Just think about it. Let's turn the page, yeah? Fresh start." I almost laughed. Not because the offer was insulting, but because it was so utterly predictable. He thought I'd still want to be in their world. That this award had unlocked some kind of key to acceptance. He didn't realize I'd already walked out of the building and locked the door behind me. I replied simply, "I appreciate the call, Greg. But I didn't come here to join your story. I came here to write my own. Then I hung up. No theatrics. No grand slam of the phone. Just a quiet, satisfying click, like closing a chapter that never really deserved the ink. There's a moment right after you turn something down that used to terrify me. The silence, the what if, the itch of regret knocking on the back of your neck. But this time, after I ended the call with Greg, I felt nothing but clarity, like stepping out of a room that smelled like old coffee and ego and breathing real air for the first time in years. I tossed my phone on the kitchen counter and leaned against the cold granite. The lights were still off, just a gray wash of morning cutting through the windows. Everything looked a little blurry the way a dream does after you wake up. But this wasn't a dream. This was mine. The apartment I lived in now had thick walls, floors that didn't creak, and a view that reached past the skyline. It didn't scream luxury. It whispered success. Minimal. Clean. No one's taste but mine. I used to think revenge had to be loud. Fireworks. Exposé. A mic drop and a gasping audience. Turns out the sweetest kind is the one you sip slowly, while the people who doubted you choke on their own assumptions. I didn't need them to crash. I just needed to rise without them. No. That week I had 6 meetings with companies I actually respected. Startups, researchers, foundations. None of them wanted me to play politics. They just wanted ideas. And me, I had a notebook full of them, some sketched during late-night ramen-fueled code binges, others whispered into voice memos while walking to a job I outgrew 5 years ago. One meeting stood out. It was with a woman named Eliza, CEO of a socially conscious robotics firm. No blazer, just a hoodie and dark circles under her eyes. My kind of people. You're the guy from the speech, she said, offering her hand. You really shook the room. I shrugged. Didn't mean to shake anything. Just spoke. She smiled. Yeah, that's the part that hit. You didn't raise your voice. You raised the bar. I liked her instantly. She didn't flinch when I talked about ethics and machine learning. Didn't roll her eyes when I brought up transparency or fair access or the silent contributors behind most modern tech. She didn't want my clout. She wanted my compass. That meeting lasted 2 hours. By the end of it, I had a contract in my inbox, a real one, with my name spelled correctly. No Connor, no footnotes, no hidden clauses, just Cameron Ellis, lead advisor, systems architecture, 6 figures, flexible terms, creative control. I signed it that night with a pen I'd stolen from Virelix years ago. Poetic, really. It still had their logo on it. Faded, cheap plastic, but it worked, and that was enough. A week later, I received a package at my door. No return address, wrapped in black matte paper with no note. Just a small tag that read, "Saw this and thought of you." Inside was a book, Outliers by Malcolm Gladwell. I laughed, not because it was funny, but because of the memory. Devin used to keep a copy of that exact book on his desk. He never read it. I know because I once caught him flipping to the chapter titles during a meeting to quote something smart-sounding. It became an inside joke in my own head. He liked to act like success was inevitable, that if you followed the path, kept your head down, and hustled, you'd rise. But I had hustled. I had drowned in humility and late hours and thankless praise. And still, they chose not to see me. That book in the package, it wasn't a compliment. It was a reminder, a nod to the fact that I was the outlier, the one they forgot to factor in, the variable they couldn't control. I didn't need the book. I already lived it. So I donated it to the public library. Dropped it off myself. No fanfare, just another full circle quietly closed. Later that month, the tech magazine Wired Frame ran a feature titled The Quiet Revolution, How Cameron Ellis is Redefining Influence in AI. I didn't pose for photos. Didn't sit for makeup. They used a candid shot me on stage, half-turned mid-sentence, the light catching only one side of my face. Expression unreadable. The headline trended for a full day. Comments poured in. Finally, someone worth listening to. Is this what leadership should look like now? I've worked under guys like Devin. This man deserves every bit of that spotlight. I didn't retweet it. I didn't need to. I knew who read it. 3 days later, Devin posted something on LinkedIn, a carefully worded essay on the importance of amplifying unseen voices in tech. Cute. He even quoted me. Didn't tag me, of course. But the phrasing was lifted straight from my speech. The comments were full of praise, the same kind of back-patting that used to lift him higher. Only this time, The most liked reply was from someone I'd never met. It read, "Funny. That sounds a lot like what Cameron Ellis said at the summit last month. Only he meant it." I didn't reply. Didn't need to. Because slowly, steadily, the world was beginning to see what I already knew. I didn't need a seat at their table. I built a better one, and they were starting to line up just to stand near it. I used to dream about what it would feel like to win. Not just to succeed, but to win. Back then, winning looked like headlines, a plaza corner office with windows on 3 sides. But the more I lived in it, the more I realized real winning is quiet. It looks like walking into a room and not needing to introduce yourself. It sounds like someone else quoting you, not knowing you're standing 5 feet away. It feels like peace in your chest, the kind that hums low and steady, not like a firework, but like a furnace. After the article dropped, the ripple started. Emails came in every morning, not just from companies or startups, but from people like I used to be. Assistants, junior developers, freelancers, ghosts behind the code. One message stood out. A woman named Priya, mid-20s, PhD dropout. She wrote, "I almost quit this year. I watched your speech in my dorm with 3 other girls, all of us crying over ramen and imposter syndrome. We didn't think anyone ever noticed people like us, but you did, and now we see each other. So, thanks. For leaving the door cracked." That line hit me in the ribs. Leaving the door cracked. That's all I ever wanted. I didn't need to be a hero. I just wanted to prove that being forgotten wasn't the same as being unworthy. That sometimes invisibility is just incubation. A few days later, I got another call, this one from a podcast, The Backbone. They wanted me to come on and talk about quiet influence and emergent leadership. I said yes with one condition, no pre-questions. I wanted it to be real, unscripted, not another corporate softball session. They agreed. We recorded in a tiny studio with egg crate walls and buzzing mics. I wore a hoodie, no makeup, no light team, just me and a cup of tea. The host, Elena, leaned in and said, "So, Cameron, what was your lowest moment?" I could have lied. Could have polished it into something shiny. But I didn't. It was when Devin called me the help. During a product meeting, I said voice Ivana. Her eyebrows rose. He said it to a room full of execs, laughed while he said it, and no one corrected him. I remember standing there, holding a binder, realizing they didn't see me as a builder, just a resource. Elena paused, and now I own the patent they based that meeting on. We both laughed, but it wasn't sharp. It was tired. It was true. Later she asked, "Do you forgive them?" I thought about that. "I don't know if I need to," I said slowly. "Forgiveness feels like something you give to get free, but I already got free without them." The podcast went viral. It wasn't supposed to, but people were hungry for something real. Not hype, not hustle, just truth told in a voice that didn't try to shout over the noise. People started using quotes from it in pitch decks. One line kept circulating. They saw me as the help, so I helped myself to everything they left behind. It made me laugh every time, because I never meant it to be clever. It just was. A month passed, then another. Then the invite came. Virelix, 10-year anniversary gala, a formal black tie event. The whole tech world attending, and me, special honored guest. I read the email 3 times. At first, I thought it was a mistake, or maybe bait, but the signature was real from the current COO, not Devin. She'd taken over after the board reshuffled post-PR crisis, post-staff leaks, post-Devin's sudden exit. I didn't need to ask why. Sometimes karma doesn't knock. It just walks in and sits down. Still, I wasn't sure if I should go. So I called someone who always told the truth. Her name's Josie. She was the janitor on our floor, back when I was still taking orders for extra oat milk. We used to talk late at night, me finishing code, her finishing her shift. I found her number, called her, and asked, "You think I should go?" She didn't even pause. "Only if you're walking in for you, not for them." I smiled. "I think I am." "Then wear blue. Makes you look like you belong to yourself." She was right. So I went, not to gloat, not to grandstand, just to exist in the space they once said I couldn't enter. The ballroom was opulent. High ceilings, white orchids on every table, LED screens looping flashy highlight reels. I wore navy, tailored. Not yet. Hair soft, expression softer. When I entered, I didn't head straight to the front. I walked slowly, greeted the interns, smiled at the ones too afraid to look up, because I'd been them. And now I was what came after. Devin wasn't there. Mia was. She gave me a tight hug, the kind that says we're okay, even if we'll never be close. Greg was near the bar, chatting with someone far more important. I didn't interrupt. Let the ghosts haunt themselves. That night I made a speech, not a long one, just a toast. To those who build in the dark, I said, raising my glass, may you find the light, even if they don't. The applause was soft, respectful, measured, and in it, I finally felt the kind of full I used to chase in empty rooms. After the gala, something shifted, not in the world in me, because walking back into that ballroom polished and gleaming with the smell of citrus cleaner and old money layered under synthetic flowers, it didn't feel like walking into power. It felt like walking into the past, like returning to a room you used to rent just to see if the ceiling still leaked. Spoiler, it did. Sure, the faces had changed. The name tags had gotten shinier, the business cards heavier, but underneath it all, the energy was still the same. People circling each other, talking to who they should talk to, laughing just a little too loudly, looking over shoulders mid-conversation. The kind of place where status is worn like cologne, and it always smells too strong. I left before dessert, slipped out while they were doing a final raffle for some NFT art piece no one actually wanted. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't need to. The moment was never theirs to close. Outside it was raining. That soft, misty kind that never really soaks you, but makes your skin feel alive. I walked 2 blocks to clear my head. No umbrella, just a quiet grin and wet cuffs. There's something poetic about that, isn't there? Spending years trying to get invited to a table, and then realizing the fresh air outside tastes better. The next morning, my inbox was full again, but it wasn't applause. This time, it was opportunity. 3 new consulting offers, 2 speaking gigs, 1 email from a VC firm that once ignored me entirely, now asking for a thought partnership. But the one that stopped me was from a high school teacher. Dear Mr. Ellis, I teach an elective called Hidden Figures in Tech. My students watched your podcast episode and voted to add you to the curriculum. Would you ever consider doing a short video for them? Nothing fancy, just you. Talking about how to stay honest and why it's okay to not peak in your 20s. We'd be honored. Miss Albright. I stared at the message, longer than I should have. Because there it was again, the thing I hadn't asked for hadn't chased the reverberation. The quiet kind of legacy, the one that spreads not through billboards or press releases, but through whispered permission. You can be like him, not loud, not flashy, just real. Just enough. I wrote back with 1 line, tell them I never raised my voice, and somehow they still heard me. I recorded the video that evening in my living room. Simple setup, natural light, no script. I told them about the time I got asked to move seats because I wasn't high level enough to be near clients. Told them about building things in secret, about staying quiet. Not because I was timid, but because I was listening. And I told them that success doesn't always come with applause. Sometimes it comes with silence, the good kind. The kind that follows when the people who wrote you off realize they're not even part of your story anymore. A week later, I received a package. No label. No signature. Just a crisp manila envelope on my doorstep, sealed with a sticker that had 1 word. Remember? Inside, a printed photo, me holding coffee probably 5 years ago. Blurry, overexposed, candid. And behind me in the background was Devin, mid-sentence, hand raised, talking to someone off frame. It wasn't the photo that mattered. It was what was scrawled on the back, in thick black pen. Funny. We thought we were the picture. No name, but I knew. Mia Pump. She always did have a flair for the dramatic. Later that night, I opened the bottom drawer of my desk. Inside was a folder worn edges paper, slightly curled from time. I hadn't looked at it in years. Inside were copies of old memos, meeting minutes, slides I built but wasn't credited on, emails where I suggested features now worth millions. Some people would call it petty. I called it documentation. I flipped through it slowly, page by page, and then quietly, deliberately, I fed each one into the shredder. Not out of anger, out of release. I didn't need them anymore. Not the receipts, not the validation. Because the truth had already outlived the proof. They told me I'd never be anything, so I stopped trying to become something for them and simply started becoming myself. The kind of man who shows up without needing applause, who builds without asking permission, who walks away from tables that don't serve anything worth staying for, and the kind of man who knows finally that the loudest revenge is peace. Peace is a strange thing. When you've spent most of your life sharpening your edges to survive, peace can feel dull, too soft, like it's missing weight, missing fire. But real peace isn't soft. It's steel beneath velvet. It's walking into a room and no longer needing to prove you belong there. It's knowing you can burn the whole place down and choosing not to. After I shredded the last piece of that folder, I expected to feel something dramatic. Closure, triumph, some cinematic swell of emotion. But all I felt was still like the pause between lightning and thunder. Like a glass of water set on a table after a long walk. Not grand, but enough. And that stillness stayed with me. 2 weeks later, I found myself in a coffee shop. Not one of those cold industrial ones with cement floors and baristas who judge your milk preference. This one had old floorboards, chipped mugs, a corkboard with handwritten job offers and apartment ads. The kind of place that still had personality. And more importantly, no Wi-Fi. I liked that. I sat near the window with a notebook. No laptop. Just pen and paper. The way I used to sketch ideas before anyone cared what I was building. And there, in the quiet hum of espresso machines and soft acoustic music, I started sketching again. Not code, not strategy. Ideas, real ones, big ones. Ideas for mentorship platforms that didn't rely on LinkedIn clout. Scholarships for overlooked coders, the ones who build for survival. Not spotlight. Funding for projects run by the people no one invests in because their resumes aren't shiny enough. A blueprint for access, not just achievement. That's when it hit me. The revenge wasn't the award. It wasn't the headlines. It wasn't watching Devon's influence rot from the inside. It was this, sitting in a quiet room dreaming new dreams, not because I was trying to prove anything, but because I could. Because I wanted to. Later that week, I got another message from Isaac, the intern from the conference. He was leaving his job. Apparently, after my speech, he started asking more questions in meetings, pushing back gently. He said things like, "Actually, I think that was Cameron Ellis's framework you're referencing when someone tried to pretend they hadn't watched the keynote." It didn't go unnoticed. They called him difficult, then ungrateful. And eventually, they let him go. His email said, "I'm scared, but I've never been this sure of anything before. If you ever need someone to be to test your next project, I'm in." Isaac. I wrote back in 3 words. I already do. Then I CC'd my operations lead. Isaac had a job by lunch. Funny, isn't it? How quickly the world starts to orbit the people it used to overlook. But I wasn't interested in becoming the center of anyone's universe. I'd done the look at me dance. Now I wanted to build systems that worked without my name on every wall. Legacy isn't about being remembered. It's about what keeps running after you stop pushing it. That's when the Quiet Build was born. A foundation, a lab, a living space for the underestimated. Not a tech incubator, a resilience accelerator. You didn't need a pitch deck to get in. You needed a pattern of persistence. Or you needed to have shown up when no one asked you to have built in the dark. Our first cohort launched 6 months later, 17 creators from 8 countries. None of them had fancy titles. All of them had something to prove. And I didn't stand on a stage for the launch. Didn't put my face on the banner. Didn't even do the opening speech. I sat in the back, watched them take the mic, watched them tell their stories. And somewhere in the middle of the third speech, from a woman in her 40s who taught herself to code while raising 2 kids and driving for Uber, I felt that same quiet peace again. That soft, relentless hum in my chest. Not pride, not ego, just presence. A few weeks later, I got a letter, handwritten, no return address. Inside was a single page. No greeting, no sign-off. Just this, "You did what we couldn't. You left the door open." I stared at it for a long time, wondering who sent it. Maybe Mia, maybe someone else I'd forgotten entirely. Or maybe one of those anonymous hands behind the curtain, the ones like I used to be. Didn't matter, because it was true. For all the noise, all the petty games, all the politics, the real revenge was never about taking their place. It was about making space, about leaving the door cracked for the next wave. For the ones still holding coffee trays and stolen ideas. For the ones who haven't yet been seen. And for the first time in a long time, I realized I didn't want a seat at the table. I wanted to build the next one, longer, wider, stronger, with no head, no throne, just room. Somewhere along the way, my calendar stopped being full of things I had to do and started filling with things I wanted to build, meetings with purpose, calls that didn't drain me, late nights spent drawing on whiteboards again, not for deadlines, but because my brain wouldn't stop humming. It felt like being home in my own skin. That's what happens when you let go of the grind for validation. You start building from freedom, not fear. And yet, even in the middle of all this, the foundation, the quiet press, the slow unfolding of something bigger than myself, a part of me kept waiting for the past to try one last time to pull me back. And it did, in the form of an invitation. Vorelics Alumni Leadership Roundtable, Navigating the Future of Tech. Subject line, we'd love your insight, Cameron. I almost laughed when I read it. Almost. Because if you strip the polish from those words, what they were really saying was, we didn't think we needed you. Now we see we do. I stared at the RSVP button. Blue. Polite. Harmless. Just like I used to be. I clicked no. Typed a message. Thank you for thinking of me. I've chosen to spend my time building futures, not revisiting old frameworks. Best of luck. And then I muted their domain. Weeks passed. The first cohort of the quiet build was already halfway through their cycle. I watched them pitch to each other, teach each other, challenge each other in ways no whiteboard interview ever could. One of them, a guy named Malik from Chicago, stood up during a feedback session and said something I'll never forget. He said, "You know what's wild? This is the first room where I don't feel like I have to explain why I exist before I show what I made." And everyone in that room nodded. That was it. That was the revenge. Not headlines, not keynotes. Just that making rooms that don't ask people to prove their humanity before proving their skill. Well, I was walking out of the lab one night when I saw a woman standing in the lobby, alone, phone in hand. Hair pulled back too tight, like someone who was used to keeping herself together, even when no one noticed. It was Mia. I hadn't seen her in person since the gala. She looked up and offered a half smile. I wasn't sure if you'd remember me. I raised an eyebrow. You sent me a photo and wrote on the back. Kinda hard to forget. She chuckled soft. Tired. That wasn't a jab. I nodded toward the side bench. You want to sit? She hesitated, then walked over slowly like someone stepping onto ice. We sat, a foot of space between us. Close enough to talk, far enough to stay honest. I saw what you're doing, she said. The foundation, the cohort. It's good. Thanks. I'm not here to ask for anything. She added quickly, I wanted to say I see it now. What you were building even back then, what we missed. I stayed quiet. Let her say it all without interruption. And I know it doesn't matter now, she continued. But I wanted to tell you. I left Vorelics a year ago. I glanced over. She met my eyes steady. It was eating me, she said. All of it. The politics, the silencing, the way we used people. You weren't the only one we overlooked. But you were the one who didn't let it kill your voice. Silence stretched between us. Finally, I asked, so what now? She shrugged. I'm consulting, but mostly I'm unlearning, and maybe just showing up differently. She pulled something from her bag, a small notebook. From back then, she said, placing it between us. Your notes. I found them when I cleaned out my office. You probably don't need them now. I took the notebook, flipped through it slowly. Handwriting neat. Tense, like every letter was trying to prove it deserved to be there. I smiled. Maybe I don't need them, I said. But it's good to remember who I was when no one was looking. Mia stood, pulled her coat tighter. For what it's worth, she said. I hope they name a building after you someday. I shook my head. I hope they don't. She paused. Why? Because if I've done it right, I said standing too, they won't know who to name it after. That night I placed the notebook on a shelf above my desk, not as a trophy, but as a mirror, because sometimes we forget how far we've come. until we see it written in our own messy handwriting. Back then, I scribbled to feel real. Now I build so others can become real. And in the hum of that truth, in the echo of all the "you'll never be anythings" that tried to shrink me, I found something stronger than victory. I found vision. The notebook stayed on that shelf for days. I didn't touch it, not because I was afraid of what was in it, but because I already knew. Every page was a breadcrumb, a roadmap written by a quieter version of myself, one who didn't yet believe in arrival, only escape. And now, I wasn't running anymore. I was building the thing I'd spent years chasing, a place to land. About a week after Mia's visit, I got a call from Isaac. He sounded breathless, like he'd just sprinted 3 blocks with news too big for text. "Cam," he said. "We got it." I smiled, already knowing. The grant, all $250K. He paused just long enough to let it sink in, and they said the proposal's language reminded them of someone else, someone they just saw at a conference. I let him have the moment, the joy, the disbelief, because I remembered what it felt like to win something, when you're still half convinced you don't deserve anything. "Guess it's official," I said. "You're dangerous now." He laughed, then quieter. "Only because you showed me how to be." I didn't say anything. Didn't have to. Because that right there, that was legacy in motion. Later that afternoon, I took the notebook down, not to read, to add something. On the last blank page, I wrote in clean, slow letters, "The quiet build isn't about what I made. It's about who gets to make next." Then I slid it back onto the shelf, one among many. Because that notebook wasn't sacred. It was commonplace now. There were 27 more like it, filled by people who were told they didn't belong, who believed it until they didn't. Each one different, each one loud in its own way, even in silence. The next few weeks were a blur of motion. We opened applications for Cohort 2, 5,000 entries in the first 3 days. Some typed, some scrawled, a few written by hand and scanned in shaky cursive from prison libraries, refugee shelters, aging out of group homes. And in every one of them, some version of the same sentence appeared. I thought no one saw people like me. I read that line so many times, it started to feel like a chorus. Because I had been them, and now I was the reply, not in words, but in space. In resources, in mentors who didn't talk down, in labs where failure was built into the architecture, in a place where starting over wasn't shameful, it was expected. One afternoon, I took a walk through the new workspace we'd just leased. Light poured through tall windows onto pale wood floors. Whiteboards stretched along the walls, filled with half-sketched dreams and equations in neon marker. It didn't smell like tech yet. It smelled like dust, paint, and potential. I paused in the middle of the room and just stood there, breathing it in, and suddenly I heard a voice behind me. "You did it." I turned. "Josie?" Same calm presence, slightly slower walk, a few more silver threads in her hair, but the same eyes sharp and steady. "I knew you would," she added. I grinned. "That makes one of us." She looked around. "It's beautiful. Still unfinished." She glanced at me. "That's the best kind. Means there's room to grow." We walked the hall in silence for a while. No rush, no agenda. Just 2 people who used to mop the same floors now walking through a space they never thought they'd own. I ever tell you about the time Greg asked me to clean faster because the board was coming in? I laughed. "Only every week." She shook her head, smiling. He thought speed equaled value. And now, I gestured around, "We teach people how to pause." She looked at me a little longer this time, then said soft as breath, "You built what none of them could." That night, I sat at my desk, watching the sun spill its last bit of gold across the skyline. I had no big speeches left to give, no demons left to bury. Just a to-do list and a quiet hum in my chest. The kind that only shows up when you've found your center. Because in the end, they were wrong. I didn't need to become someone to get noticed. I needed to remember who I already was before they convinced me otherwise. And that was the final revenge. Not a mic drop. Not a public takedown. Just this. A view I earned. A room I created. And a world where no one else like me would ever have to ask for a seat again. The day we opened the doors for Cohort 2, it rained. Not a dramatic storm. Not thunder and lightning. Just steady curtain-like rain, soft enough to blur the windows, loud enough to remind you the world was still moving. Funny. 5 years ago, rain meant inconvenience. Now, it felt like a cleanse. Outside the lab, a line had already formed. Umbrellas, ponchos, shivering shoulders, and wide, nervous eyes. I walked out, early coffee in hand, and stood by the glass watching them. Some were talking. Others sat cross-legged under the awning, laptops on their knees, headphones tucked in tight. These were the builders, and not because of what they'd built, but because they'd shown up. Again and again, even when no one watched, even when the reward was silence, especially then. I remember a girl near the back, maybe 19. Denim jacket, bright orange curls pulled back under a plastic hood. She was holding a soggy notebook in both hands, as if letting go would erase what was inside. She caught my eye and smiled. It wasn't nervous. It was electric. She knew why she was there. She didn't need permission. And in that smile, I saw a younger version of myself. Before they erased me. Before I let them. We let the cohort inside early. They moved through the space like explorers in a new country. Quiet reverence, then laughter, when they realized the furniture wasn't off limits. That the rooms were theirs to stretch in, to shape. One guy stood at a whiteboard and without hesitation drew a giant tree. Another rearranged a modular sofa into a half circle and began mapping neural interfaces with sidewalk chalk. No one stopped them. No one said that's not how it's done. That was the point. There is no one way, only the next way. And these were the ones who would find it. That afternoon, I stood in the back of the main room, sipping tea from a chipped mug someone had brought from home. I liked that. It reminded me of the early days. The mug I used at Virelix had someone else's name printed on it. I kept it anyway, because it made me invisible. Now, they all had mismatched mugs, and everyone knew their names. No printed tags, just self-written placards, calligraphy and scribbles and nicknames. The room was messy, loud, but it was alive, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel the need to control it. I just let it happen. Let them happen. Later that week, I got a message from someone unexpected. Subject line, congratulations, and a question. It was from Devin, not from an assistant, not through LinkedIn, from his personal email. He wrote, "Come, I've watched what you've built. I won't pretend I had anything to do with it. But I do have one question. How do you let go of being the villain in someone else's story?" I didn't reply right away. In fact, I waited 3 full days, not because I was punishing him, but because I wanted to make sure my answer came from clarity, not memory. And when I wrote back, it was just one line. You don't get to choose whether you're the villain, only whether you keep playing the part. He never replied. That was fine. Some conversations aren't about closure, they're about completion. That night I stayed late, not working, not planning, just listening. The cohort was still scattered across the space, laughing, arguing, sketching, dreaming. I stepped into the recording booth, a soundproof glass cube in the corner of the main floor. We'd built it for podcasts, for pitch practice, for late-night idea dumps, when thoughts came faster than keyboards could catch. I sat down, adjusted the mic, and hit record, just to see what would come out. What I said wasn't prepared, wasn't even fully conscious, but it went like this. If you're hearing this, it means you're in. Maybe no one told you that before. Maybe you've been knocking on doors for years, waiting for someone to say it. So I'm saying it. You belong here. Not because you earned it. Not because you passed some gatekeeper's test. But because you never stopped building. And this space, this is yours now. Don't wait for applause. Don't wait for permission. Just keep building. That's the legacy. That's the revolution. I ended the recording and saved the file. Labeled it. Welcome, Real Builders. WAV. I didn't send it to anyone. Didn't post it. Just left it there in the archive. Because I knew someday someone would find it. And when they did, maybe late at night, maybe after a hard day of silence and shut doors, they'd hear my voice. And know they weren't alone. That someone had walked this road before and left the light on. 2 months into the second cohort, the lab was unrecognizable, not physically. The walls were still the same. The paint still smelled faintly of primer and late-night pizza, but the energy, it had grown teeth. Gone were the cautious first days, the polite nods, the whispered questions. Now there were debates echoing through the stairwell, post-it notes, layered 6 deep on glass panels, someone sleeping under a desk with a hoodie for a pillow, and an algorithm scrawled in Sharpie across their forearm. This wasn't chaos. This was motion. This was what happens when underestimated minds finally believe they're allowed to take up space. I watched it all quietly. No clipboard. No agenda. I didn't hover, didn't direct. My job now wasn't to steer it, was to clear the road. One night I came in late. The front lobby lights were low. Everyone else had cleared out except for one. The girl with the orange curls. She sat cross-legged on the floor, 3 laptops open around her music, playing softly from a small speaker. Not classical, not lo-fi. Something in between, like a heartbeat buried under fog. I didn't want to interrupt, but she looked up before I could turn away. "Oh," she said, blinking like I'd startled her. Didn't realize anyone else was here. "Just passing through," I said, stepping into the glow of her workspace. "How's it going?" She shrugged, then smiled. "Terrible and perfect." I laughed. "That's about right." She gestured to the screen nearest me. Lines of code flickered across it. The kind only a few people in the world would recognize, and fewer would understand. "Do you know what this is?" she asked. I leaned in. It was a language I hadn't touched in years, but it sang the same way all good logic does. "A foundation that doesn't need to apologize," I murmured. She stared at me, then nodded slowly. "Exactly." There was silence for a moment. "The good kind." Then she said, "When I got here, I thought someone was going to tell me how to do it all. And now," she smiled wider this time, "now I hope no one ever does." I nodded. That means it's working. Later, I stood by the window, watching her type in rhythmic bursts, fingers dancing like she was playing piano for a song only she could hear. It hit me then how many of us had been trying to make permission sound like music, and how different the world would be if someone had just said, yes, like that. Keep going. Not perfect, not polished, just yes. So, the next day, a journalist reached out. Big platform, national reach. They wanted to do a feature, The Quiet Build, the incubator redefining innovation culture. I'd been dodging headlines for a while now, letting others take the interviews, pushing attention toward the builders, not the architecture. But this one felt different, because they didn't want to spotlight me. They wanted to spotlight them, so I agreed. The reporter Jalen arrived with a small crew and a lot of curiosity. "What made you start this?" he asked, notebook open, eyes sharp. I thought for a long second, then said, "Because I was built in the gaps, and I figured if I could survive there, maybe others could thrive there." He nodded. "Did you ever think you'd end up here?" I smiled. "No, but I stopped chasing there a long time ago. Now I just focus on building here into something worth arriving at." The piece ran 2 weeks later. The headline read, "The Silent Architect, Cameron Ellis and the Revolution Without a Stage." They didn't use the glamour shot. They used a photo someone in the cohort had taken on a film camera, me standing in the hallway, barefoot, coffee in hand, laughing at a whiteboard covered in equations and doodles of cats. It was honest. It was human. It was right. The article went viral again, which by now didn't surprise me. But what did surprise me was the email that followed. Subject line, "About your old desk." It was from someone in HR at Verelix. Apparently, during their office renovations, they'd stumbled on a box in storage, unlabeled, tucked behind the old server racks. Inside, my mug, my faded badge, a folder labeled Miss Dev Notes, C.E. They asked if I wanted them returned. I thought about it, then replied, "No need to send them back. You can donate them to the Lost and Found." Seems fitting. That night, I walked the empty halls of the lab again, not out of nostalgia, out of gratitude, not the performative kind, the deep, steady marrow-level kind, the kind you feel when you look around and realize, I did this, not alone, but through dismissal, through erasure, through the quiet months when I wasn't even sure I was real anymore. I left my office door open, not just unlocked open, because if someone was walking by and needed a moment, a question answered, an idea heard, they wouldn't have to knock. I'd already built that into the foundation. They said I'd never be anything, and they were right. I didn't become anything. I became everything they said I couldn't. The email came at 2:03. Not from a recruiter. Not from press. From someone I hadn't heard from in 7 years. Subject line: I owe you an apology. It was from Brian, one of the early engineers at Virelix. A guy who used to joke that my greatest contribution to the company was silence. He wasn't cruel, not like Devin. He was just ambiently dismissive. The kind of man who mistook politeness for incompetence. I opened the email slowly, not sure if I was curious or just awake and aimless. Come, you probably don't remember me. Or maybe you do, but not kindly. I've been watching everything you built from the outside, mostly. And it's taken me a long time to understand just how wrong we were. Not just about your talent, but about what matters. We celebrated noise. You were building signal? I see that now. And I'm sorry. I don't expect a reply. Just wanted to tell you. Thank you for staying in the room. You changed it. B. I stared at the screen for a long time, then closed the laptop. Didn't reply. Didn't delete it either. Some things aren't for reacting to. Some things are just proof that the echo of who you are eventually reaches places you thought were soundproof. That morning, I arrived at the lab early. The building was still waking up, lights flickering on the faint scent of toast, drifting from someone's desk toaster. In the main room, Malik, one of our strongest second cohort voices, was standing in front of a projector screen, hosting a spontaneous demo session with 5 others. No audience. No pressure, just iteration. He was saying something about dignity being a feature, not a bonus. And I just stood there, arms crossed, smiling like an idiot. Because they got it. They weren't parroting me. They weren't performing some imagined version of what success looked like. They were writing the new definition in real time, and I was lucky enough to watch. Later, I slipped into my office and pulled out one of the newer notebooks, blank except for the first page. There, I scribbled one question: what happens when the invisible become architects? It stayed with me all day. A week later, a high-profile panel on ethical AI asked me to be a guest. It would be streamed live to over 1 million viewers. Sponsored, headlined. I said no, and instead offered up 3 builders from our cohort, a woman from Sao Paulo, a self-taught coder from Montana, and a non-binary UX specialist from Istanbul. They weren't names yet, but they would be. And when they took that stage, the audience didn't blink. They listened. They asked questions. They stayed long after the feed ended, flooding the comments with, "Where can we hear more from them?" This is what thought leadership should look like. Finally, people who know why they're building, not just what. I watched the whole thing from the break room, sipping lukewarm tea, a half-eaten granola bar in hand. Didn't even tweet about it. Didn't need to, because watching them take up that space and hold it like they were born for it was the most complete feeling I'd ever known. That night I walked home. Didn't take a car. Didn't rush. Just let the night wrap around me like a familiar jacket. Let the city lights blink in slow Morse code like a heartbeat just beneath the skyline. And as I crossed under a flickering street lamp, I remembered something Devin used to say during all-hands meetings. The future isn't waiting. You either lead it or get left behind. He used to say it like a threat. I used to believe it. But now I know something he never did. The future doesn't wait. But it doesn't need leaders in suits. It needs invitation. It needs builders and listeners and people who walk into the silence and leave a chair pulled out just in case someone braver than them decides to sit down. Back at my place, I sat on the balcony watching fog roll between the buildings like spilled smoke. I opened my journal again, and beneath the question I'd written that morning, what happens when the invisible become architects? I added a second line. They stop asking for doors. They start designing skylights, because sometimes the ceiling is the problem. And sometimes you rise anyway. The fog stuck around for 3 days. It rolled through the city like a soft warning, turning every skyscraper into a ghost, every headlight into a whisper. Most people found it disorienting. I found it familiar, because for years I moved through life just like that, seen but not visible, present but not acknowledged. And now, even with the accolades, the press, the so-called thought leader titles I never asked for, I still felt most alive in the quiet, where ideas bloomed under cover of low light, where the noise couldn't find me. It was in the fog that I first understood. I was never meant to be loud. I was meant to be clear. On the fourth day, something unexpected happened. A letter arrived, handwritten. No return address, the paper thick and rough, like it had been torn from a past that refused to die quietly. Inside was a single sentence. You never raised your voice. And I still hear you. No signature. But I knew who it was from, and I knew what it meant. It was respect. The kind that doesn't beg for credit. The kind that only arrives after years of steady contradiction. It didn't make me smile. Didn't make me ache. It just landed like a stone in a still pond. One last ripple. Then peace. I kept it, not out of nostalgia, but as a reminder. The work works even when you're not looking. Even when you're not credited. Even when your name is an afterthought. Because influence isn't always measured in metrics. Sometimes it's measured in echoes. The next week I visited a high school. Not because it was in the press schedule. Not because I needed outreach hours or a video montage for the next board meeting. Just because I wanted to. The teacher, Miss Albright, had reached out again. Said her students were doing final presentations and had built a unit around invisible innovators. She didn't ask me to speak. She just said, would love for you to sit in the back and watch. That was the first reason I said yes. The second was the photo she sent. A wall in her classroom, covered in Polaroids, hand-drawn portraits, Post-its shaped like stars. In the middle, a printout of me on stage. Underneath it, the quote that had started this whole quiet movement. They saw me as the help, so I helped myself to everything they left behind. Surrounded by messages from the students. I want to build like him. My silence is strategy. Watch me even when you won't. So I sat in the back row, hoodie jeans quiet. Watched them stumble through nerves, then blossom into clarity. Watched them talk about systems that ignored them and ideas they built anyway. One kid stood up, name tag read Zuri, and said, I stopped asking, who will let me? Now I ask, who's going to stop me? The room cheered. And me? I blinked back something warm and thought, that's it. That's the inheritance. Not wealth. Not position. Conviction. After the session, Ms. Albright caught me by the vending machine. You okay? She asked. I nodded. I think this is the first time I've seen the future and didn't flinch. She smiled. They're better than us, huh? They're free from us, I said. Then pulled a notebook from my coat pocket. The same one I'd written in since the quiet build started. I opened to a clean page and scrawled a note. If you ever feel small, remember, I was small once. Then I stood anyway. I handed it to her. Give this to whoever needs it most. She didn't ask questions. She just folded it, tucked it into her clipboard, and nodded like we'd finished something important. Because we had. That night, I walked home again. Fog gone now, sky wide open. And in that rare, unfiltered clarity, I saw myself, not as I was, but as I'd become. Not a name, not a founder, not even a survivor, but a mirror, one that proved to others. You don't have to be loud to be heard. You don't have to be chosen to arrive. And you definitely don't have to be them to win. You just have to start and then keep going. Even when no one claps. Even when they call you help. Even when your name is misspelled on the only mug you're allowed to use. Because someday, if you do it right, they'll spell your name correctly on the building. Or maybe they won't. Maybe they'll forget your name entirely. But they'll remember how they felt when you walked in. When you spoke. When you made space. And that's better than a plaque. That's presence. By the time Cohort 2 wrapped, I'd stopped counting wins. Not because they stopped happening, but because they didn't need to be tracked anymore. They just were. The wins looked different now. Smaller, softer. Like a student emailing to say she finally raised her hand in class without whispering her answer. Like a dad building a prototype in his garage after his kids fell asleep, then demoing it on Zoom with his toddler still curled on his lap. One of the builders, a quiet woman named Rowan, launched a public database of failed tech projects, analyzing what was lost and what was learned. She called it the ledger. Her tagline, even invisible work leaves fingerprints. It spread like wildfire. Startups cited it. Think tanks shared it. VCs ignored it at first. Then one of them was profiled in it. Suddenly, she was visionary. I watched her on a podcast, her first live appearance. Someone asked what inspired this. And without flinching, she said, I wanted to build something Cameron Ellis wouldn't need to exist in. I paused the video, closed my eyes, and just breathed. Because that was it. That was the moment I realized I was no longer the story. I was the spark, and the fire had caught. That weekend I flew to Seattle. No press, no appearances. Just me. Hoodie, headphones, aisle seat. I landed late. Took a cab to an address that felt both foreign and painfully familiar. 1427 Berkmere Drive, the house I grew up in. It had new paint now. A newer door, different landscaping, but the porch still creaked. The fence still leaned, and I swear I could smell the exact brand of detergent my mother used to overfill the washer with. I didn't knock. No one there knew me anymore. I just stood across the street with a coffee and watched the front light flicker. That's where I first learned how to disappear. That's where I first whispered dreams I didn't dare speak aloud. It's also the place I first heard, "You're not like the others. You're not made for more." They meant it as comfort, but I took it as prophecy, and I broke it. Back in the hotel that night, I opened my laptop and recorded a short video. No script, just impulse. I said, "Some people are born with spotlights. The rest of us have to build our own fire. This is for the ones writing in the margins. For the ones who dream under flickering porch lights and whisper code into cracked keyboards. I see you. Because I was you." I ended it with, "Keep going. Even if they never cheer. Because one day, they'll listen without knowing who taught them how." I didn't post it publicly. I sent it to a list of just 11 names, people from the next cohort, the ones who almost didn't apply, the ones who said things like, "I don't have anything to show. I've been told this isn't realistic. I'm too tired to fight for space again." They all wrote back. None of them used the word thanks. They used words like self, possible, seen. That was the new language. We weren't building a tech incubator. We were building a translation system, turning pain into process silence into syntax, turning overlooked lives into undeniable frameworks. One of our alumni, the one who used to say, "I don't belong anywhere," now teaches a weekly course called Quiet Systems Design. It's not about technology. It's about presence. About how to enter a room without armor. About building tools that don't require users to shout to be heard. I attended her last session. Sat in the back again. She opened with a quote from me, not from a keynote, not from a podcast, from something I scribbled once on a whiteboard when I thought no one was watching. "If they don't give you the blueprint, make your own and leave copies." When the class ended, she found me outside by the vending machine. Full circle. "Still hate that lighting," I joked. She smiled. "Still makes us look haunted." I nodded toward the lecture hall. "You're doing it. You know that, right?" I think she said slowly. I stopped trying to do it. I just started being it. Then quietly, "Thank you for the first inch of runway." I looked at her. Steady, strong, softer than steel, but twice as durable. And I said the only thing that felt honest. "You took that inch and built a launch pad." We stood in silence for a moment, then walked back in, because there were still chairs to set out, still rooms to light up, still hands waiting to be told, "You're allowed to build this." The final day of Cohort 2 arrived quietly. No confetti, no stage, no graduation speeches. That wasn't the point. Instead, the builders gathered in the common room, a space they had redesigned without asking. Sofas pushed into a circle, laptops closed, shoes off, just people, breathing, remembering who they were when they first walked in, and who they refused to be anymore. I didn't sit with them right away. I watched from the hallway, like I used to watch meetings through glass walls I wasn't invited into. But this time the wall was gone. Literally one of them had taken it down, replaced it with a sliding door and a mural of all their favorite failure quotes. My favorite was scrawled in red Sharpie, all caps. "Didn't work, still worth it." That could have been the motto of my early career. Maybe of my whole life. After a while, they called me in. Not like a leader, more like family. Malik handed me a small wooden box. No lock, no engraving. Inside, 26 handwritten letters, one from each cohort member. No titles, just stories. Stories of what they built, what they broke through, what they buried and finally exhumed. One read, "Before this, I coded like I was apologizing." Another, "I used to whisper ideas to avoid hearing them laughed at." And this, "You taught me that soft doesn't mean small." I closed the box gently, didn't say much, just breathed in the moment. Because I knew deep down that I was no longer building for them. I was building with them, and soon, behind them. They were ready to go where I couldn't, where I wasn't supposed to. 'Cause that's what real legacy is. Not a spotlight. A lantern, passed hand to hand. No ego, no ownership, just flame. Later that night, I sat in the sound booth alone. Same mic, same tea, same quiet hum in the walls. And I recorded one final message, not for the press, not for investors, for the next person who would sit where I had, alone, uncertain, still believing somehow. The voice was softer than usual, slower. I spoke directly into the silence. If you're here, it means they didn't break you. Maybe they bent you. Maybe they laughed. Maybe they told you were too quiet, too odd, too soft. Maybe they forgot your name at the meeting you scheduled. But you're still here, and I need you to know that's enough. Not the app, not the prototype. You just breathing and building in a world that never asked for your voice, but needs it anyway. I paused, then whispered, "You belong here. Keep building. I'll leave the light on." Then I saved the file and titled it, "Final Lantern, Wave." Hours. A week later, I stepped down, not from the foundation, but from the front of it. Promoted 2 cohort alumni to co-directors. Told the press I was moving into a quieter role. They didn't understand, but my builders did, because the best architects eventually step off the blueprint, to let the structure breathe. On my last official day, someone asked if I'd change anything. If I'd go back, say something louder, fight harder. I smiled. No, I said. They needed me quiet, so I built in the quiet, then added, and when they finally listened, I was already done talking. I left the office late that night, no ceremony. Just turned off the lights, locked the door, tossed the key into the potted plant outside a quiet tradition. Then I walked into the night. No destination, no map. Just a slow, steady sense of completion, like the sound of the final click in a safe when everything inside is finally yours. They said I'd never be anything, so I became something they'd never see coming. And when they tried to name the award after someone else, I already had a building full of people who didn't need awards to know what they were worth. Sometimes revenge isn't loud. It doesn't arrive in fire or headlines. It doesn't kick down doors. It builds new ones. This story was about a man, Cameron Ellis, who spent years being overlooked, underestimated, and unheard, who fetched coffee and bit his tongue, who sat at the back of the room holding ideas no one asked for, until one day he stopped asking and started building in silence, in shadows, in the margins, not to be famous, not to be liked, but to prove to himself and to the world that being invisible is not the same as being irrelevant. He didn't just rise. He rewrote the map and left breadcrumbs behind for others like him to follow, not for praise, but for presence, not for credit, but for continuity. And when the applause finally came, he handed the mic to someone else, because real revenge is a room full of people who used to be ignored, now building futures no one can deny. So if you're still waiting for permission, consider this it. Start, build, and someday, when they finally turn around, you'll already be ahead. Now close your eyes and know this. You're not too late. You were never too small. You were always exactly what they didn't see coming.